So we've just been watching their press conference by the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, where they've been talking about what the US is calling Operation Midnight Hammer. That was that operation which dropped bombs on 3 nuclear sites in Iran. We heard Secretary Hegseth describe the operation as focused, powerful and clean. He said it had devastated the Iranian nuclear program. We don't obviously have any independent verification of that at this point, but that is how the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is describing it. He said it had taken months and weeks of planning, positioning and pre-positioning. And he said that it was the first deployment of these massive ordnance penetrators, these so-called bunker busters that we've been talking about all week. And he said it had been done closely arranged with the allies in Israel. We then heard from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, who said that this had been carried out with exceptional skill and discipline and had severely degraded Iranian weapons and infrastructure. He said the whole operation had begun at 5 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday, about 10 p.m. here in the UK, and it began with the US submarine launching about 24 Tomahawk missiles. He then described aircraft that had flown ahead of these big B-2 aircraft to run a deception mission, essentially to confuse the Iranian defense systems. But he also said that not a single shot had been fired and that he thought that the US strike package, as he called it, had got in and out of Iran without being detected, and that they had used 125 aircraft, 75 precision guided missiles and 14 of these massive ordnance penetrators that we have been talking about. We'll discuss the actual logistics of that operation with our security expert, Mikey Kay, in just a moment. But for now, let's go back over to Washington, D.C. to our Chief North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue. Gary, a lot of praise there from the Secretary and the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the members of the military who carried it out and for the President himself. They're clearly very happy with how this operation went.
They are, and they've sort of flooded the zone there with quite a lot of facts, which of course will everyone will pore over and make of what they will. The one thing I will draw out of that was that they did say twice that the battle damage assessment is ongoing, and that is something that is what you would expect, and it's a little bit at odds with the President saying that there is total and complete obliteration of these facilities. How do you know at this point when you're still assessing it? They repeated that kind of rhetoric, but at the moment you'll notice that while we had a nice map of the bombers leaving the US and their direction and all that, there was no imagery, no evidence, if you like, of these assertions. So I think that the jury is very much still out on their claims about the nature of what's been achieved here. That may come in the coming days, it may not, but at the moment it's just assertion. And I think while that was happening, we're also seeing some comments from the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who's been talking to other networks, warning Iran, suggesting that this was now an opportunity, suggesting that their program had been put back by years, but also just suggesting that it had been completely destroyed. And so the messaging has begun on this, and that will carry on through the day with the Donald Trump's senior lieutenants out on all the talk shows in the coming hours.
Gary, for a president who has run 3 campaigns at this stage on being the president to take America out of wars, being the peacemaker, the deal maker and so on, the detail that we heard there from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in particular, this sounds like it was quite a sizable operation involving submarines, various different type of aircraft, many personnel involved as well. Quite the opposite of what the President said he was going to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of hardware here, including some decoys by the sound of it that flew west instead of east. 125 aircraft, I think you mentioned, 75 precision-guided bombs, all this kind of thing. I think if you're going to get involved, then the way you would want to message this is look how powerful we are, look what we can deliver, overwhelming force, not a shot fired in response to us. That is a message that may resonate with the American people who may be wondering where those promises went about ending forever wars and staying out of foreign conflicts. So if you're going to do it, you probably want to do it and make a show of it like they've done tonight, and really, in a sense, flaunt your power. And that was very much what we just saw there.
And they were also asked, Gary, weren't they, about when they had notified the congressional leadership, which is the kind of par for the course procedure here, that you would alert those people in Congress who ordinarily have to pass permission perhaps for something like this.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, I missed that bit while I was doing something else, so I don't know what was said about that, but you're right, there is normally a process.
My handwritten notes here, Gary, from my handwritten notes here, as I was scribbling frantically, there was a lot going on. Secretary Hegseth, I think, said we notified the congressional leadership in the immediate aftermath of the operation once all of the American pilots were out of Iranian airspace.
That sounds quite late to me in terms of what's typically done. They have this Gang of 8 group of congressional leaders in House and Senate who they typically keep in the loop on this sort of thing. And certainly some Democrats have been complaining about not being kept in the loop on this kind of thing. But bear in mind, there have been some efforts in Congress to try and force the administration to get authorization. But Donald Trump's not interested in that. He, like many American presidents in recent years, has taken more executive power to himself. He will say there's no declaration of war here, so there's no constitutional right for Congress to intervene on that. This is they're hoping a one and done situation, although he clearly left the door open last night for more attacks, which he said there were still plenty of targets left. And it would be a lot easier, he said, next time if Iran didn't choose peace over tragedy.
All right. Gary O'Donoghue there in Washington, thank you very much for that. Well, let's try and translate some of that military speak now into language that mere civilians can understand. I'm joined by the Security Brief's Mikey Kay, former senior officer and assault helicopter pilot with the British military. Mikey, there was a lot of terminology there, a lot of descriptions of various branches of the military. We didn't actually see any video of what might have happened, which is slightly unusual, I suppose, in this day and age. But what's your take on the operation as it was described there?
Well, I think all the posturing that we saw last week, the mass exodus of what's called KC-135, they're big air refueling tankers. There was about 21 of those that pressed east from the US, along with fighter packages from F-35, which is a 5th generation stealth fighter, to F-22, which is probably one of the most advanced air defense fighters in the world. Only the US has got that. To F-15s. And all of these strike aircraft have the ability to do what the Joint Chiefs of Staff said was, in military parlance, it's called SEAD, and that stands for suppression of any enemy air defenses. So we're all focusing on the B-2s at the moment. So we saw that mass exodus, the tankers, the fighter jets, the B-2s, and this is obviously what they were posturing for.
General Kane mentioned as well, didn't he, the Tomahawks fired from the submarine in advance, and those aircraft flying ahead of the B-2 to kind of as a distraction, I suppose. Yeah,
Pete Hegseth used the word misinformation. The military word is deception, decoy, and we saw the Joint Chiefs of Staff using that terminology as well. So it's a multi-layered package, a composite air package, CMAO is what we call it in the military. You'll have the core of that being the B-2s with the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators. You can just see it's a phenomenally long journey. The B-2s will have been picked up at various stages of that. So as they're coming out of the States, they're going to be using KC-135 tankers to refuel. As they're then coming over into Europe and into the region, that's when you'll get these additional suppression of enemy air defense fighter packages joining them, going ahead. And what they'll be using is one of the key assets that those fighter packages will have is called an anti-radiation missile. So what the fighter packages will be looking for is the surface-to-air missile operators in Iran territory, as soon as they switch on that surface-to-air missile radar, there's generally two. There's a search radar and a target tracking radar. But as soon as they're turned on, these aircraft have the ability to look at that radio frequency, understand what it is through algorithms in the software, and then be able to, if it remains on, be able to pinpoint that surface-to-air missile system with the anti-radiation missile, get that off the rail, and then take out any threat to the B-2s coming in. So that's the general idea of it. And then you've got the TLAMs, which are, it looks like from the map we can see on the screen there, based off the Omani coast. They've got a range of over 2,000 kilometers. They fly very low. They fly at about 3/4 of the speed of sound. They've got an accuracy up to about 10 meters, GPS guided with a 1,000-pound warhead. So if you then flood, more of Iranian airspace with that, that's going to be also form part of a decoy package as well. They're used not like the GBU-57, the big ones. They're used to what's called soften up targets, if you like, and just basically provide, a scatter effect. Iran's air defenses have been degraded and in some instances destroyed quite significantly. So, they're going to have problems with dealing this sort of scatter effect, and that was the whole intent of the package.
And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff there, General Dan Kane, said twice, again looking at my handwritten notes here, that they're unaware of any shots having been fired. And he said particularly on the way out, no shots were fired by the Iranians. Does that strike you as unusual, that all of this would be happening in Iran and they wouldn't be trying to fire at what had caused it?
Well, I think it goes back to the conversation we had a little bit earlier, which was about Trump tweeting about air superiority. Air superiority is a doctrinal word used in military parlance to suggest some form of superiority over another country's airspace. So you're minimizing any attritive effect to air operations that you want to conduct, in this case over Iran, for example. So I think the whole strategy from last week was not just by the IDF. I think the US were definitely speaking and working with the IDF, because the IDF were targeting these surface-to-air missile systems, where you did see that bomb damage assessment video, ballistic missile sites.
The battle damage assessment here hasn't been completed yet.
And it won't be. I mean, the Secretary, Pete Hegseth, used the word destroy.
Devastated.
Yeah, Trump used the word obliterated. Joint Chiefs Dan Kane was more nuanced and more realistic by saying severely degraded. You can't say you've destroyed something unless you've got an accurate bomb damage assessment of A, what you were targeting, and B, what's left of that. The way that it usually works is, as I spoke about earlier, is you have what's called this lightning pod. And it's effectively a big tube that's strapped under an aircraft that has electro-optics and infrared that's used to be able to target, track, and surveil and record, and then do surveillance on what the bomb damage assessments are. And so when targets are usually attacked, these pods are used to look at what the bomb damage assessment. Basically, they will film the bomb or the missile going in, and then they'll look at the after effects of that. But in this case, I think it was very different. The B-2 doesn't have that capability. I think this will have been a huge standoff, deep strike. I don't know what the range is of a GBU-57, but it will be that. And we're seeing, because there isn't this video footage, because these pods seemingly haven't captured any BDA, bomb damage assessment, it's going to be much harder to figure out what happened. And then we're talking about facilities underground. I mean, you physically have to have someone in there to look at what the damage has been done. And then we don't know what was in there. The Iranians are saying they've moved a lot of the enriched uranium already. So what was actually there in the first place? Has it just decanted to something else? What are the metrics of effect? And the metrics of effect in this case are going to be really hard to gauge.
All right, we'll maybe learn some more later. But for now, Mikey Kay, thanks so much for joining us with all of that information. Now, as we've been hearing there, 3 key sites were hit. That's been described to us just there by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So let's have a closer look at them. As they've been outlining, those sites were at Fordo, Natanz and Esfahan. President Trump said the sites had been obliterated, and as we've just been discussing there, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff described them as severely degraded. Esfahan is a uranium conversion plant, whilst Natanz is an enrichment plant. And even before these US strikes, the International Atomic Energy Agency said that Natanz had already sustained severe damage. But the main site hit was Fordo. The uranium enrichment site there is situated about 60 miles, 100 kilometres or so south of the capital, Tehran, and it's in a mountainous region. It's thought to consist of two main tunnels that house centrifuges, which are used to enrich uranium, as well as a network of smaller tunnels. Now, reaching this underground installation, which is about 60 metres below ground, as we've been discussing, requires these more powerful bunker-busting bombs, which only the US has. And as we heard there from that press conference, 14 of them were used in this operation last night. The official name is the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, and the only planes that can carry such bombs are B-2 stealth bombers. And as we've heard there, these are the ones that were used last night. 125 US aircraft involved in this mission. Multiple B-2s were told. And as I say, 14 of those massive ordnance penetrators. Well, let's have a listen to some of what the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi had to say about these US strikes when he gave a news conference in Istanbul a little earlier.
The Islamic Republic of Iran condemns in the strongest terms the United States' brutal military aggression against Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities. It is an outrageous, grave, and unprecedented violation of the fundamental principles of the Charter of the United Nations and international law. The warmongering and lawless administration in Washington is solely and fully responsible for the dangerous consequences and far-reaching implications of its act of aggression. The US military attack on the territorial integrity and national sovereignty of a UN member state carried out with genocidal Israeli regime, carried out in collusion with the genocidal Israeli regime, has once again revealed the extent of the United States' hostility towards the peace-seeking people of Iran, who will never compromise over their independence and sovereignty. The Islamic Republic of Iran continues to defend Iran's territory, sovereignty, security, and people by all means necessary against not just US military aggression, but also the reckless and unlawful actions of the Israeli regime. While President Trump was elected on a platform of putting an end to America's costly involvement of forever wars in our part of the world, he has betrayed not only Iran by abusing our commitment to diplomacy, but also deceived his own voters by submitting to the wishes of a wanted war criminal who has grown accustomed to exploiting the lives and wealth of American citizens to further the Israeli regime's objectives.